mention this very delightful little lady. You write her name down because a couple of years from now, she's going to be a very, very important name in the motion picture business, stage too. And her name is Karyn Kupcinet.
Karyn Kupcinet never got the chance to fulfill her promise. On November 30th, 1963, the 22-year-old actress was found murdered in her West Hollywood apartment. The killer has never been found. Karyn Kupcinet occupies a lonely corner of Hollywood mythology, the girl destined for stardom, whose biggest close-up came in death. In the next hour, we will recount the haunting story of Karyn Kupcinet.
It was, to me, the quintessential story of the young woman who comes west to be a movie star and finds death instead.
We will explore Karyn's brutal desire for perfection.
If she gained 3 pounds, she would go crazy and she'd take a diet pill.
We will examine how a broken love affair pushed Karyn towards the edge.
I did not see deeply enough who she was and how lonely she was.
We will unravel the events which led to her mysterious death.
Karyn was the epitome of what you think of as a victim.
And finally, we will discover how Karyn touched the life of the niece she never knew.
I want people to see that she was just a human being, just a woman trying to make it.
This is the story of broken dreams and innocence lost. This is the story of Karyn Kupcinet, the true Hollywood story.
There is a positive dream of being one of the world's. Her life's ambition was to be a star.
Never recovered from the public scandal.
November 30th, 1963. The nation mourned the death of President John F. Kennedy, assassinated in Dallas 1 week earlier. In Los Angeles, actor Mark Goddard and his wife Marcia were preparing to go out for a Saturday evening.
I was shaving, and I was looking in the mirror, and all of a sudden, I was looking at Karyn. I was thinking of Karyn.
Mark and Marcia were concerned about their friend, 22-year-old actress Karyn Kupcinet. She had been extremely depressed over a broken relationship.
I just knew that something had happened. So it took us about 20 minutes to get there, from where we lived to her apartment.
I parked near the garage of her apartment house. And I went up the stairs, and I could sense the heaviness of death. I really could. And I walked down the hallway, outside hallway, to her door.
When I opened the door, and it was dark in her apartment.
We walked into the room, and I saw there was a bowl of cigarettes over on the floor, and the television was on.
The whole room looked black and white, except for this figure of a body. And I went over and I said, Karyn, wake up, thinking that maybe she had taken an overdose of drugs or something. And then I turned the lamp on, and I just screamed.
We ran out and called down, suicide, suicide, there's been a suicide.
But 22-year-old Karyn Kupcinet was no suicide. The coroner determined she was strangled. Friends and family anticipated a swift resolution to the crime. There were, however, more questions than answers. Karyn's father, Chicago columnist Irv Kupcinet.
The cruelest moment came when one of the top officers told us, well, your daughter now is a statistic.
More than 3 decades later, Karyn's murder remains unsolved. Karyn never found stardom, but she won the role of a tragic icon. Writer Sam Kashner.
Karyn Kupcinet is a kind of stand-in for every young woman who wanted to go to Hollywood, who was the cutest or perkiest girl in her class, and winds up there looking for stardom and finds out that it's a kind of mirrored haven for lost souls.
To make a better life for all of our citizens.
A dangerously destabilizing precedent.
Time and events swept Karyn Kupcinet out of the public's memory. The story might have ended here if it weren't for a young woman named Karyn Kupcinet.
To me, she was like a legend. Ever since I was so young, I would look at pictures of her and think, God, she was so beautiful and she was so talented and wonderful. And so I always thought, you know, how wonderful it would be to be like her.
Carrie is the niece Karyn never got the chance to meet, the daughter of Karyn's brother, Jerry. In 1989, when Carrie was 17, she discovered her aunt's publicity file at the Los Angeles Film Academy Library. She had to find out more.
My grandparents started bringing out boxes and boxes of stuff that they had kept, you know, letters that she had written and diaries and publicity photos and childhood photos. She was starting to become a real person, and a real person that might have, you know, been like me.
The letters and diaries revealed that Carrie and Karyn shared similar traits. Like Karyn, Carrie pursued acting, carefully documented her life, and suffered from an eating disorder. There was one obvious distinction. Writer James Elroy.
Karyn Kupcinet never got the chance to grow up. Karyn Kupcinet did not have the presence of mind that Carrie developed. Were it not for Karyn Kupcinet and the road that she went down, Carrie Kupcinet might have foundered in Hollywood the way Karyn did.
Coming up, Karyn is entranced by the magic of Hollywood.
It was very glamorous, and she only saw that side of it.
And later,
I thought she took her own life because of her broken love affair with Andy Prime.
on November 30th, 1963, 22-year-old actress Karyn Kupcinet was found murdered in her West Hollywood apartment. Police never found her killer. The vestiges of Karyn's life lay in the shadows until they were brought to light by her niece in 1989.
I suddenly felt like I'm related to this person, and this terrible thing happened to her, and I have to try to find out more about it.
The more Karyn Kupcinet read her Aunt Karyn's diaries, the more fascinated she became. Karyn Kupcinet grew up privileged. Her father, Irv Kupcinet, was a syndicated columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times. Karyn's mother, Essie, nurtured a passion for the performing arts in her daughter. Irv and Essie nicknamed their pride and joy Cookie.
She was a born actress. She never stopped. She was a natural. Every time she was in any kind of a show at school, she was always commented about being so talented.
Karyn's younger brother, Jerry.
She was always either reading plays or in plays at school, or we'd go to plays. There was always something theatrical going on.
A visit to the Kupcinet household was almost like going to the movies.
There were always celebrities around, so you never knew who would be there.
A lot of the film stars of the 40s and 50s would make their way to the Kupcinet's apartment. Joan Crawford coming in the middle of the night, making her do calisthenics, and Burt Lancaster carrying her on his big shoulders.
Family vacations often took the Kupcinets to Los Angeles.
It was very glamorous, and she only saw that side of it. And she only saw the side that PR people would present to a columnist.
Karyn's acting break came in Chicago at the age of 13. She was asked by a family friend to be Carol Lindley's understudy in a play called Anniversary Waltz.
And she had a curiosity and a generosity as a human being, even as a kid, that was very noticeable. I mean, I can still remember her bouncing up and down the steps to this day.
Lead roles in high school plays and later in Chicago theater came easily for the ingenue. In the fall of 1959, Karyn moved to New York to conquer Broadway, but she later described that experience as one of the low periods in her life.
I couldn't help being aware of the attitudes manifested by producers, directors, etc. They were gracious and friendly to me. They saw me only as Kup's daughter, never as a 19-year-old girl with talent. This led to self-doubt, insecurities, and humiliation for me.
Karyn's insecurities led to an obsession with her physical appearance. She gained and lost weight, agonizing over each extra pound on the scale.
Her body was not a tall, skinny. She was short, and she had a kind of a round, kind of like a tiny Marilyn Monroe-y kind of figure.
In her search for perfection, Karyn had a plastic surgeon reshape her chin, but her new look changed little in her quest to make it on Broadway. Then in November 1960, family friend Jerry Lewis offered Karyn a bit part in his upcoming movie, The Ladies' Man.
I'd been in New York, and I hadn't been working very much, but I'd been learning quite a bit and going to classes out there. And the thought of working in Hollywood sort of intrigued me.
In December, a resolute Karyn headed to Los Angeles. She was 19 years old.
She was smart, she was ambitious, she was talented, she had so many hopes and dreams.
Coming up, Karyn loses weight to gain self-esteem.
She would go crazy and she'd take a diet pill.
And later,
One of the guys took me aside and said, "Don't you know that Karyn Kupcinet was found dead?"
Karyn Kupcinet grew up with entertainment in her blood. When Hollywood beckoned in 1960, the 19-year-old was determined to prove she could make it as an actress. The door to fame was open, but what lurked beyond was unknown.
She could have stayed in Chicago and been a queen, you know, and it was very brave of her to come to Hollywood.
Unlike many other aspiring actresses who came before her, Karyn Kupcinet didn't arrive in Los Angeles alone and penniless.
The first time I met her was at the airport when I went to pick her up. And she came down with her grandmother off the runway with about 47 different suitcases.
Karyn's father, famed columnist Irv Kupcinet, asked family friend Marcia Ross for a big favor.
My job was to oversee her, watch her, take care of her, introduce her to the right people, and make sure that she didn't get any trouble.
An apartment in Hollywood became home for Karyn and her grandmother. By late December 1960, Karyn made her appearance in The Ladies' Man. But what she saw on the big screen was not the image she expected.
Oh, Catherine, Miss Wellermelon wanted me to tell you.
When you see yourself walking and talking and acting and, oh, it was just horrible. Anyway, I'm trying to get used to it, but I don't think you're ever really satisfied.
That Herbert is to have his breakfast. I'll see to it. I was...
Soon after her move to Los Angeles, Karyn recorded her thoughts in a date book. There were few entries in the diary until May 16, 1961, when she had plastic surgery on her nose.
Awake during operation. Agony. Felt needles. Cutting. Everything.
Here's this woman who's not yet 22 years old, who's having her face fixed, and there's an amazing entry, it's kind of heartbreaking entry in one of her journals where she said, Warren Beatty said, "I'm pretty today," and Eddie Fisher said, "You look like Liz," and that's the kind of thing that made her happy.
We took her to see Eddie Fisher. Eddie Fisher had been married to Liz Taylor. After the show, we went backstage with Eddie, and he said, "I've never seen a resemblance so keen, so perfect." And it caught my eye and it caught my breath, he said.
Still, confidence remained elusive to Karyn.
She hated rejection. because she was so accepted all the time. And she comes from Chicago, where she's so well known, and then she goes to Hollywood, and people were finding out about her, but it took a while.
In June 1961, a chance meeting turned into a golden opportunity for the 20-year-old.
Just a quirk of fate, I happened to see a producer, and he asked me to come in and read for Hawaiian Eye, and I read for a part on it, and I got it, and it was strictly on talent.
Karyn's luck continued in August when she landed a recurring role in another TV series, Mrs. G Goes to College. But nothing could alleviate Karyn's anxiety about her weight.
If you looked at her, you'd think she was perfect. So I don't know whether it was all in her head or whether she was getting this reaction from other people that she went to work with.
Eventually, Karyn discovered what she believed was the perfect solution: diet pills.
She was living with my mother when my mother was there, and Cookie had pills all over the place. Finally, Cookie put them in a laundry hamper, and my mother found them and said, "You're on pills." You know, to that generation, that was pretty horrible.
If she gained 3 pounds, she would go crazy and she'd take a diet pill. I could tell when she was on them because she was always a little bit more excited and a little hyper.
January 23rd, 1962, 121 pounds. I look too heavy, yet everyone calls me beautiful. February 1st, 117 pounds. Everyone noticed my weight loss. February 5th, 125 pounds. I stayed in bed, ate. Feel so draggy and tired. February 15th, 121 pounds. Took pills. Looked gorgeous.
In late February 1962, Mrs. G Goes to College was canceled.
She was a good actress. She put on an act several times with us because she didn't want to worry us. And then my mother couldn't take it there anymore, and she moved back, so Cookie was living alone and loved it.
Coming up, Karyn becomes driven by another obsession.
You're young, you're going to be young forever. You're going to be a star forever.
Actress Karyn Kupcinet wore the mask of self-assurance as she took on Hollywood in the early 60s. But underneath was an insecure 21-year-old seeking love and attention.
We thought we were the hippest animals on the planet, but I think all young people think that at that time, and they should. It will go quickly enough that you're not.
Karyn came of age during a time that ushered in the winds of change, but still held the illusion of innocence.
No one ever thought of anything going wrong. It was like you lived for the moment, you lived for the day.
While America reinvented itself, Karyn searched for her own place in the sun. The promising actress landed the role of Annie Sullivan in The Miracle Worker at the Laguna Beach Playhouse in the summer of 1962.
I was floored, you know. I didn't realize that this wonderful person had all that talent besides. Yeah, she was very, very talented.
But still, Karyn struggled with low self-esteem and a growing dependence on diet pills.
In those days, diet pills was pretty regular. I didn't know she was doing so many. I don't think any of us knew.
In a town where despair is not an option, Karyn hid hers well. But diet pills and sleeping aids were taking their toll on her mind and body.
October 1st, 1962. Woke up feeling slightly nauseous and groggy. Hallucinations, inferiority complex, aching limbs, stiff neck. Surely liver damage resulted from pills.
2 months later, Karyn's diary noted an important date, December 4th, 1962. A rangy, good-looking 27-year-old actor named Andrew Prine entered her life.
I saw Karyn and immediately was attracted to her. She was so bright looking and so beautiful. And There was an intelligence about her that was immediately apparent.
Karyn was captivated by Prine's charisma.
You're young, you're going to be young forever, you're going to be a star forever. There's not quite anything else hanging in the heavens like you.
By February 1963, Karyn's universe revolved around Andrew Prine.
She was very reliant upon me, and I had to have more room. I was at that time in my career and my life when the world was open to me. I mean, in terms of young ladies, it was endless and wonderful.
Karyn's diary illustrated the fine line she walked between hope and dejection in her unpredictable relationship with Prine.
February 19th, 1963. Must maintain my own identity, not become his doormat, so useless. May 30th, 1963. Andy distant, me terribly possessive and weak.
I began to realize that she was taking pills, which I really didn't understand. And I must say, no credit to me, I was sort of impatient about it. I did not see deeply enough who she was and how lonely she was.
Back in Chicago, Karyn's mother was in the dark.
We shared many confidences, she and I can't understand why I didn't know more of what was happening.
Karyn's fragile emotional state spilled over into her professional life.
If you are not a struggling actor, it's very difficult to impart to you what that's like and how scary that is. She worried very much about her weight, excessively so, because of the demands of the business. There is no forgiveness if you're overweight. There is no forgiveness if you're too old. There is no forgiveness if your nose doesn't look right. No one cares. And she knew that, and she was getting that message.
By the summer of 1963, Karyn's unhealthy fixation on Prine began to consume her life.
If she knew he was going to be at a certain party or at a certain club, she'd make sure she was there watching him and who he was with. And he kept telling her, just leave me alone.
It was very strange why she would do that. Because she wasn't nuts. She was very intelligent, very smart, very down to earth. But when it came to Andy, they were falling apart, and she was pretty unhappy about it. So you do strange things.
Coming up, Karyn's desperation builds to a disturbing climax.
She had all the sensibilities of a person who's going to get hurt.
In the summer of 1963, Karyn Kupcinet was struggling as an actress and distressed over a crumbling romance. As Karyn's depression deepened, the only outlet seemed to be her diary.
Why does my image of me have to be so aesthetic and perfect? What's the use of living with nothing to believe in, have faith in?
Despite personal setbacks, nothing prepared Karyn Kupcinet for the unwelcome news she received in July 1963. The 22-year-old was pregnant.
In those days, an abortion was a big deal, and she had to go to Tijuana to do it, and she almost bled to death on the way back. And I think Mark and Marcia both were there, and they drove her to Tijuana. And she sure didn't want my parents to know about it.
Karyn recovered from the physical trauma of the abortion, but not from its far-reaching emotional effects. Andrew Prine remained the unhealthy focus of Karyn's life. Friend Earl Holliman.
Karyn was the epitome of what you think of as a victim, you know. She had all the sensibilities of a person who's going to get hurt, you know, in one way or another. Very sensitive girl, insecure, not knowing yet who she was, and desperately needing somebody to love her the way she wanted to be loved.
Later that summer, Karyn and Andrew received a series of anonymous death threat notes.
They were predicting my death and terrible things. And it frightened me, and I went to the Hollywood police station, in fact, and showed them this and wanted a permit for a gun, and they just said, look, just forget it and go home.
Prine couldn't forget about the chilling notes.
I took security measures in my house and in her apartment to sort of make us feel more secure, because some nut was out there.
The summer of 1963 passed without incident. In September, Karyn moved to another apartment in West Hollywood and landed a guest spot on The Perry Mason Show. She still clung to Andrew Prine.
She'd stalk him, and a couple of times she told me she'd gone to his apartment and opened the window and was peeking in on him.
November 4th, 1963. I hid in the attic, then sat outside in cold for 2 or 3 hours. Wish I were dead.
On November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated.
I called Karyn right away because I knew she would feel terrible. And we decided to get together with my buddy Earl Holliman.
We all felt so terrible. We said, let's get out of here. Let's go somewhere. So we went to Palm Springs, never knowing it would be Karyn's last weekend on Earth.
It was a close time. That part of it was sweet. And we parted friends.
It was the last time Andrew Prine saw Karyn. On the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Karyn had dinner with Mark and Marcia Goddard.
She was crying. She was upset. She wanted to get her boyfriend back. She knew he was seeing another girl. She wanted to know what she could do, how she could get him back, and we were trying to convince her to get on with her life.
Karyn returned home around 8:30 p.m. Later that evening, she was joined in her apartment by 2 male friends. While the 3 watched television, Karyn dozed off. Her friends left and were home by 11:30 p.m. Between 11:30 and midnight, Andrew Prine called Karyn.
She seemed all right. I don't remember any details of the conversation. It wasn't dramatic. She was okay. She seemed okay.
No one heard from Karyn again. Three days later, at 7 p.m. on Saturday, November 30th, the Goddards discovered Karyn's body. Within minutes, West Hollywood patrol officers arrived.
I thought she took her own life because of her broken love affair with Andy Prine.
Sheriff's detectives found 13 containers in Karyn's medicine chest, filled with diet pills and tranquilizers. The investigating officers contacted the Kupcinet family in Chicago.
We were all pretty shaken up by it, obviously. My father and a couple of his friends flew out to L.A., and he had to ID the body, and that was very rough on him.
Word of Karyn's death spread quickly in Hollywood.
As I walked in, they all turned and looked at me in a very shocked way, and they said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And one of the guys took me aside and said, "Don't you know that Karyn Kupcinet was found dead?" And I was blown. My mind was blown. And I couldn't get it.
On Sunday, December 1st, the coroner announced the cause of Karyn's death: murder by strangulation. The estimated time of the murder was late Wednesday or early Thursday morning.
I feel so sorry that I couldn't have talked to her that night. You know, you never know what's going to happen, and you don't know if I had been there, if I had visited her, over Thanksgiving, maybe something would have been different. I don't know. We all feel so guilty about it because we weren't there and because she was alone.
Investigating officers began interviewing witnesses and potential suspects. Karyn's former boyfriend, Andrew Prine, was high on the list, but Prine believed he had the key that could unlock her murder.
I gave them the death threat notes, and they took them to the lab. And of course, the next day they said her fingerprints are under the tape, and she sent the death threat notes. And I was completely stunned, not over what she had done, but over my lack of perception and insensitivity toward her.
A 27-year-old male who lived in the apartment below Karyn was also questioned, but there was no evidence to link him or anyone else to the crime scene. On December 4th, 1963, the funeral of Karyn Ann Kupcinet was held in Chicago. She was laid to rest, but there was no closure.
Our feeling was bitter, absolutely bitter, because of the lack of a real thorough investigation.
With no suspect in custody for Karyn's murder, Prine became an easy target of suspicion.
This very well-dressed older lady that I didn't know looked at me and screamed, "You murderer." She said, "Get away from me," and she was terrified. She said, "I'll hit you with this plate." And the whole room was staring at me in shock.
Karyn summed up the dark side of Hollywood in an eerie epitaph.
It's an emotional industry. Buying emotions, molding emotions, selling emotions. It's a woman, a bitch wearing cheap clothes, too much makeup, costume jewelry, and rented furs. It's a town where actors pour their lifeblood into it and then kill themselves because of it.
In the years that followed, dead-end tips trickled in, psychics came and went, and investigators continued to question witnesses. Somewhere in the puzzle, a killer was free, and Karyn Kupcinet's death remained a mystery. Coming up, a new theory on what may have happened to Karyn Kupcinet.
I don't think Karyn Kupcinet was murdered.
The murder of 22-year-old Karyn Kupcinet has been shrouded in mystery for 36 years. In the spring of 1998, Karyn Kupcinet was determined to unravel the facts of her aunt's death.
Just having a broken hyoid bone is not in and of itself fatal.
Through Karyn Kupcinet's diaries and letters, Karyn grew to love a woman she never met. Just like her Aunt Karyn, Karyn Kupcinet pursued an acting career. But by the age of 27, Karyn was no longer interested in the allure of Hollywood. She had a different goal.
I decided to call the sheriff's department, the unsolved homicide department, and see if there would be a way I could get into her file that I know has, been very closed off to the public for 35 years.
Sergeant John Yarbrough of the L.A. County Sheriff's Homicide Department was in charge of the Karyn Kupcinet case.
We decided to work with her in that regard because it is an unsolved case. And maybe with the attention that she would bring to the case, we might be able to come up with a new solution to it.
There was disarray in the bedroom as well, but it didn't.
Yarbrough put Karyn in touch with someone else who had been captivated by the Karyn Kupcinet story. Best-selling author and crime aficionado, James Elroy.
It was, to me, the quintessential story of the young woman who comes west to be a movie star and finds death instead.
He saw the story, and the story now is Cookie through Carrie's eyes, and how it affected Karyn.
Karyn saw the road that many, many women went down. Karyn saw that her aunt went down that road specifically, and that it killed her. Karyn was able to wrest change from Karyn's tragedy.
Irv and Essie Kupcinet find it impossible to understand why their daughter's case remains unsolved.
They did a precursory investigation. They did the usual thing they have to do, but you got to go beyond that when you're dealing with a murder suspect, and they failed to do that.
The facts of Karyn's death are complex, and various theories abound on what may have happened that November night in 1963.
The cause of death in this case is known to us, but whether it's murder, suicide, or accident is not so easily defined in this case.
And that's what made it so difficult for them to determine any injury, because the...
Retired L.A. Sheriff's homicide detective Bill Stoner helped Karyn sort through the voluminous murder files on Karyn Kupcinet.
I think when they first found her, they thought it was probably a drug overdose. They had all these empty pill vials. Her body was in a deep state of decomposition. The indication at the time was they couldn't determine any injury to the body.
I am primarily a novelist, Secondly, a journalist. I have had my snout in the gutter of crime for over 4 decades, and my instincts say it's not a murder, it's an accidental death.
If somebody held a gun to my head and I had to make a decision, is this a homicide or an accidental death, I lean towards homicide.
If this is truly a murder case, which I believe it is, then somebody in her social circle is the one who did the killing.
The last week of her life, she had gone through 80-odd Disoxin pills. A book was found open here to a page that said, "Dance in the nude like a wood nymph to free your inhibitions." She could have fallen down while dancing around in the nude like a wood nymph to free her inhibitions, clipped her hyoid bone, crawled up over on the couch right against this wall here, and died. Nobody heard anything.
It could also be true that somebody re-entered or came into the apartment without her really realizing it and made some sexual advances, was immediately rebuffed and immediately retaliated. May have actually done something overt to prevent her from becoming more vocal. So therefore, nobody heard anything.
The hyoid bone is right about here in the neck, and when a person is strangled, it pops. It's a small bone. Karyn Kupcinet's hyoid bone was allegedly broken. A strong theory at Sheriff's Homicide at the time was that Dr. Harold Cade, the coroner who performed the autopsy on Karyn, broke the hyoid bone.
If he knew that he broke that hyoid bone and he lied about it, I don't see that happening.
The role that drugs played in Karyn's death may never be known.
When it was called death by manual strangulation, right off the bat, they didn't test for the presence of the drugs that Karyn Kupcinet had in her medicine chest.
36 years later, the motive behind the death threat notes that Karyn sent to herself and Andrew Prine almost makes sense.
She began to create not only a perception that she was a victim, but that they were victims together. And I think one could speculate that perhaps in her thinking this would be a way to bond back with him.
Confusing leads and misinformation, possible forensic mistakes, too many different ways to die. These are the facts that, for now, make the Karyn Kupcinet case an enigma. Coming up, Carrie meets the man who was so much a part of Karyn's life.
I said, this is a very important moment.
There is no simple explanation for the death of actress Karyn Kupcinet. One fact is certain. The Kupcinet family carries a timeless portrait of Karyn in their memories, that of a woman with the poetry of life and the power of beauty undiminished. Karyn's story has a common thread for anyone who grieves over the sudden, tragic loss of a loved one.
It has happened to so many other people that getting her story out there maybe will touch somebody else that either this has happened to, or they'll see how one person's death can affect someone that didn't even know her.
This is a story that I don't think will ever be over. And now that my daughter is so engrossed in it and so enveloped by my sister's life, that to me is scary, and it's wonderful because I love seeing parts of my sister in her.
With the death of someone so young comes the speculation about what might have been.
Think of the power that she could have developed if she ever reached a level of A, self-knowledge, B, sobriety, and C, self-worth. She could have taken these obsessive drives, turned them back around, and made something good out of herself.
She was a gifted writer. I think that's why writers respond to her. It's not just the tragedy. I also think they sort of recognize a kind of kindred spirit when they see one.
I saw changes all the time throughout the years, looking back at her diaries, and I think that if she had lived to be my age, she would have been long over all of those, and she probably would have been a lot happier
with who she had become.
In the fall of 1998, 27-year-old Karyn Kupcinet continued her search for the truth.
Meeting Karyn Kupcinet was wonderful. All of a sudden, the whole past comes forward, and not all bad. And I put my arms around her, and I said, "This is a very important moment." and we both were laughing and almost crying. And she said, "Yeah, it is. It is."
Karyn's friends, barely able to grasp the magnitude of her death more than 3 decades ago, now have a deeper perspective.
You don't really heal. You forget for a while. And you go on and you lead all these different lives. But when you start thinking about the person, the pain doesn't go away. It dulls, but it doesn't go away.
It's a spirit that's so strong that lives with me, see? She'll always, you know. She's okay right now. She's in good hands.
At the end of all of it, or any of my self-pity or the rage against the injustices of the world, all I could think was, what a dreadful waste of a beautiful person. What a horrible waste.
Perhaps one day, the truth of what really happened in 1963 will be uncovered. Until then, Karyn's story lives on through her family.
I keep thinking of her as a young girl.
A child, in our view.
A divine child.
I don't really know where I'm headed with this in my life, but I know that wherever I end up, I know that she'll be there, and I think she's guiding me there.
Whatever the future holds, Karyn's words still ring true for those who dream of stardom in a mythical place called Hollywood.
It's terribly difficult to keep your head clear in a town where the largest experts are make-believe, fantasy, and unreal reality. The best way to keep from sinking is to have other interests that have nothing to do with your personal career. To learn, to grow intellectually, and to be realistic, and to try to be objective about yourself.
This video is brought to you by The Concluding Chapter of Crawford, a comprehensive research guide to Joan Crawford. www.theconcludingchapterofcrawford.com. Join us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.